parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. I'm Michael Schmidt. And the reason I introduce it, because I tried a year ago or 1.5 years ago to talk some sense into people in regards to the cell phone addiction in their children. And we kind of looked a little bit on what is out there actually as research, and there's a lot of research out there which actually supports the concerns we all should have in regards to this new technology. It's not about banning technology, it's just, you know, at what time in the life of a growing individuality should that be applied and should be used or not used. And I'd like to introduce Katherine. And I know Katherine originally from making music together. She and her son, Alex, they played in the Messiah in the barn, where her hair got half eaten by a cow, because she was sitting so close to the pen where the cow was. And since then, it's kind of a really respectful, how shall I say, joyful occasion to meet you. And then I found out what she was doing, and holy moly, I thought, finally somebody who really puts her teeth, puts her teeth into that and really follows up. And as a result, I told her, when the discussion erupted in regards to the public school boards, that they have so much trouble in the high schools now with the addiction to the phones, suddenly there was a big discussion on CBC. And then I saw that she was in Vancouver and in Calgary and everywhere, and I thought, yeah, I think what actually kick-started the whole debate was at the end kick-started by her, that finally also CBC started to look at the issue. And I had, interestingly enough, somebody approached me to go to the Blue Water School Board to tell them about the policy here at the school, because they have also huge problems there at the school board. And then I said, well, I have to admit we have the same problem here. And we can't close our eyes to it, but we can only try one by one to work towards a different approach to that. I only can tell how we do it in our family. There's no way that they have a cell phone. They can borrow if there's something special they need to do, but not until they're 18 years. There's no cell phone. And if you're very clear about that, then there's not much discussion. If you leave it open, yeah, maybe, and, well, you can have it for an hour. No, doesn't work. So, Katherine, I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy that somebody is doing that, coming from this area, and let's hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
And do it very forcefully.
Very forcefully. Well, thanks so much for inviting me to come speak. It's nice to be fairly close to home. I live in Port Elgin, so it's about a 45-minute drive from here. So, as Michael said, my name is Katherine Martinko. I am a writer. As you can see, I'm the author of Childhood Unplugged, which Michael purchased half a case of them, I think, at my book launch last summer. So some of you may have already had access to it or looked at it, I'm not sure. But thank you for distributing my book over in this area of the province, which is wonderful. So I've worked as an environmental journalist, actually, for the past 12 years. I spent many years at a website called treehugger.com as a staff writer there, a reporter, and then a senior editor. And while I was at Treehugger, I got really interested in this question of kids needing to spend time outside in nature, outdoor free-range play, and also sort of anti-helicopter parenting and developing independence in kids. And then I also became interested in this question of technology and just the saturation of devices in kids' lives. And I sort of realized that combined, it was creating this real maelstrom of issues where the devices were actually inhibiting the kids in many ways from going outside to play and developing the resilience and the independence that they needed, because they were becoming so dependent on these devices. And so then that's when I became even more interested in the issue of technology and children, and I ended up writing this book, which just came out last summer. So that's sort of how I approached it professionally, but it's also a personal issue for me. So I'm a mother of 3 boys. Alex is my oldest. I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old as well. And so I am navigating these issues as well. My kids don't have phones. Ongoing point of contention, of course, we may get into that later. But it's something that I am witnessing through them, through their eyes. They're in the public education system in Port Elgin, which has its pros and cons, of course. So I'm a parent who's in the trenches as well, and I understand what so many of us are going through. So tonight I'm going to give an overview of some of the problems relating to excessive screen time, and then talk about this philosophy of digital minimalism that my husband and I have embraced in our own family life, and how beneficial it is to kids, and how you can implement it for different age groups and different stages. And then there's going to be a Q&A after, and I welcome any questions and comments that you may have, even if you just want to share stories about things that you're dealing with. Often this is a very engaging time during these presentations for people to share what they're going through. So, I mentioned a digital minimalist approach. So I like to say right out the gate, this is not anti-tech. It's also not screen-free. So I also am a realist. I believe that I live in this world that now uses digital technology in many ways. And on many levels, I'm very grateful for it. You know, it has enabled my entire career as a journalist and as a writer. I work full-time as an editor now. And it's because of my laptop and my phone that I'm able to do this. But, as you can see in the next point, a digital minimalist recognizes that this technology is a tool. It is not a toy, and it's also incredibly powerful, and therefore worthy of our respect. So I think that that is a message that we should be conveying to our children, that these are not toys. You know, we should not be handing our kids supercomputers to entertain themselves when they're just feeling a little bit bored. But they can, as they get older, maybe use that tool to be able to do quite amazing things with their life. A digital minimalist parent employs delay tactics, so is comfortable going against the status quo, which is, yeah, it's a little questionable these days. Kids are getting phones younger and younger, and so it can feel harder to hold out as long as you do. But a digital minimalist parent creates strict limits, recognizes that there are some very real benefits to holding out as long as you possibly can to give your kid these devices. And of course, I'll get more into that later. Digital minimalist parents strive to enrich a child's offline life. So they recognize that they have a responsibility to help that kid figure out what to do with their time and develop off-screen interests that they will then be able to do independently to entertain themselves. And to preserve childhood, because a big part of these devices is that they're exposing kids to mature content that's far beyond what they should be experiencing. The internet is this ageless realm, you know, where everybody of different ages is all doing the same things, and it is not appropriate for a lot of children to be on it. A digital minimalist parent is prioritizing in-person interactions, recognizing that in-person friendships are of a completely different caliber than virtual friendships, and also engages in this concept of techno-selectionism, which I find quite interesting. You know, we are constantly being bombarded with new technologies, but we should be able to be selective about them. There's nothing wrong with experimenting with something and then recognizing, this is not working for me. I'm now going to remove it from my life, or delay it for another 5 years in my child's life, or whatever, and then go back to what you had before. And yet we're very leery to do that, it seems, when it comes to technology. We assume that things are good just because they are new. So, brief overview, what is digital media? I know that a lot of you already know this, of course. Cell phones, iPads, computers, video games are all problems. Some very common social media apps that kids are using on a regular basis. What I find interesting, I think about this sometimes, how the device almost makes the platform worse. So these social media platforms, some experts say, would not be maybe as insidious if you were just accessing them on a desktop computer once or twice a week or once a day for these kids. And neither would a smartphone be as insidious if you just had a smartphone without the social media apps on it. It's sort of like this combination of the portable social media apps and the YouTube and the video games and everything on these devices that kids can carry with them and access every minute of the day that's made them as terrible as they are. And that's why we're seeing the real decline, the sharp decline in the last 15 years in kids' mental health, and it's really because of the combination of the smartphones being able to support all of these apps. So we do have a problem. Some of the latest statistics come from Common Sense Media, which is an organization that tracks this globally. I guess these numbers are from the States, so they would likely be similar here in Canada. Tweens, ages 8 to 12, are spending 5.5 hours a day on screens. For teens, 13 to 18, it's 8 hours and 40 minutes. And I will draw your attention to the word entertainment. I think that this is very key. So this is not screen time for school. This is not research for school. This is strictly time that they are using to pass their hours. And I find that very alarming. Unless we think that maybe they're doing constructive things with their time, I think that we should look at the next stat there, which is also from Common Sense Media. The main app categories, they just put out a survey a couple months ago. Social media is in number 1, YouTube is in number 2, and gaming is in number 3. So, I do get pushback sometimes and they say my kid's using screens for really formative things, but in reality, they're not really looking at Google Maps or practicing their coding or reading Wikipedia. They're usually on social media or on YouTube. So there's another study from England just this past fall that came out, and it's confirming this too. So 76% of young people surveyed spend most of their free time on screens. So you can see 84% of the time is spent watching streamed content, 81% using a phone to communicate with friends, 66% watching TV, and 62% playing games. And of course, these numbers are going up, which means that just by virtue of simple math, the time spent doing other things like working a job or doing homework or spending time with friends in person is on the decline. And this is very unfortunate. So we know that too much screen time is bad, but I'll just break it down a little bit. This could be a whole presentation in and of itself, of course. But the physical repercussions of too much screen time, of course, we've got kids who are not developing the fine and the gross motor skills that they need in order to grow optimally. It's been really interesting. Over the course of writing my book, I talked to a lot of experts, and one was a pediatric occupational therapist who said that she and a lot of her colleagues are seeing kids whose bodies are failing to develop in really unusual ways. So they're falling out of their chairs, they can't stand up straight sometimes, they will trip over their own feet, they're fumbling to pick up pencils, and they attribute it to the lack of outdoor free play where the kids, historically, have evolutionarily evolved to be able to, somersault and swing from trees and flip upside down and balance on the edge of a water, like slippery rocks on the edge of a lake, or, and all of these things are developing the senses that a kid needs to be able to move their body in space, but they're not getting that anymore. They're just sitting looking at devices. Of course, this has an impact on sleep, and that's quite significant as well. So the quantity of sleep is being reduced because kids are staying up later. They have more reason to stay up late because they're watching devices. Who wants to stop watching their show if, it's really engaging? And then the quality of the sleep, of course, is being compromised because the exposure to the blue light that's emitted by the screens is suppressing the release of melatonin, the hormone that makes you feel sleepy. And a lot of kids are just amped up by what they're seeing. And if a phone is in the room, especially for teenagers, they'll be waking up several times during the night in order to check their notifications to see if anything has come in. So it's a really bad idea to be putting phones anywhere near a kid at night. Emotionally, we've got kids who are less empathetic. They're being numbed to the real world because they're spending so much time online. They're less inclined to feel curiosity about the real world, which I think is incredibly tragic because childhood is this fleeting time in life when you can feel so curious and excited about the world, and the phones are just, they're just destroying that for little ones. Of course, we've got increased loneliness, which I'll get into as well. We've also got normalization of violent content. So again, I mentioned that agelessness of the internet, and I think we put age limits on so many other things in the world, like movies, and being able to access other damaging substances and whatnot. And yet with phones, it's just become this free-for-all that's completely unlimited. Neurologically, it's quite scary. More research is now coming out, MRIs that have looked at the actual brain structure of children who have been exposed to excessive amounts of screen time from a young age. And they're finding that kids who have had excessive screen time are less developed. They're better in visual processing, but they're underdeveloped in other areas of the brain that require more complex processing. So that's things like language development, memory consolidation, facial recognition cues, as well as empathy. And then socially, it's quite ironic in a way that these devices are often described as social connectors, as a way to stay in touch with your friends, and yet they are very much at the root of this growing isolation that kids are feeling, because the quality of the online relationship comes nowhere near the quality of the in-person relationship. We've got kids who are being cyberbullied at much higher rates than ever before, and they can't escape their bullies because the phones come home, and then they're bringing the bullies home with them through the phone. We've got kids who are exposed to Of course, a lot of really disturbing content on Instagram and TikTok that is undermining self-esteem, all kinds of body image issues arising. And then just by virtue of having the phone, the kids are they're interacting less with their family and with their parents and their siblings, and I think that that's unfortunate. So we know that virtual interactions are not equal to in-person interactions. So I do hear from parents who will say, but my kids' friends are all online, and that's where their relationships are, and I feel like if I took that away, they wouldn't have their friends anymore. But the problem is that they're not the same thing. You know, the one thing should not be replacing the other thing, because we as humans are hardwired to need in-person interactions. So this list of 4 features comes from Jonathan Haidt's brand new book, The Anxious Generation, that just came out a few weeks ago. He's a renowned psychologist who's talking extensively about this issue and really helping to push it into the mainstream news. And he explains that in-person interactions are embodied. So they include hand and facial expressions which help to convey meaning. You don't get that online. They're synchronous, happening in real time. So I'm speaking to you right now, and I'm picking up your body language and your facial expressions to see that you're listening to me. But online, you throw out a message and you might have to wait, and there's nothing worse than seeing that a text message has been read and the person has chosen not to answer for like 24, 48 hours, or maybe never. That's traumatizing to a teenager. In-person interactions, of course, are one-on-one. They happen in smaller groups. They always have, historically. We're not used to being up on a soapbox in front of the entire world awaiting its judgment. It's a very performative way of speaking, and it changes the way that these teenagers, and younger kids as well, are choosing to express themselves. And it's unnatural and it's not healthy. And then, of course, in-person interactions happen in communities where you have an incentive to behave well, to be civil, to be respectful. There's a reason to be polite because you don't want to get kicked out of the group and lose your friends. Whereas online, it's so easy to dehumanize the other people that are online, so it's easy to be rude. So, it doesn't mean that virtual interactions are never beneficial. There can be a time and place for it, but they should not be the bulk of your child's social interactions. I like to just spend a little time before I get into the more practical stuff about childhood and talking about what its purpose is. And I think that we do have a choice as parents, as educators, as grandparents to ask ourselves whether or not we want our kids to have a play-based childhood or a phone-based childhood. Because increasingly it's looking like the two are not compatible. Childhood, as I see it, is rehearsal for adulthood. We know that it is a chance to take low-stakes risks. So a lot of the things that kids are doing out in the playground or out in the forest or whatever with their friends, they are rehearsing, they're practicing these interactions and these challenges that are going to, and if they fail at them, at this point, it's not going to harm them that much. But if we protect them too much when they're young and then throw them out into the world as adults, those same failures could be quite devastating to them. Childhood is a chance to absorb your local, your family culture, your national culture, a time to get to know your relatives, to establish lasting relationships. In-person relationships last longer than online ones. And to inherit a sense of wisdom and belonging and of knowledge. And I think that there's so much information that is now coming from all parts of the world, and while those global perspectives can be really interesting, a lot of kids no longer feel rooted in their home communities. And there's a deep loss that comes along with that. One great description I read was screens were described as experience blockers for kids. So when you give a kid a screen, you basically shut them off from the rest of the world and they miss out on all of these other experiences. And another quote was that when you give a child, you give a child social media when you want their childhood to end. So I thought that that was just a good way to think of it as well. So we can spend a lot of time talking about all the negatives of too much screen time, but the big question I think is, what are kids not doing because they're spending so much time online? And then sort of the inverse of that is, what do we stand to gain then by getting the kids off their devices? There's so much that we gain in the process. So this is now my bold proposal, which is disconnect to reconnect. These are my 3 kids during COVID down at the Port Elgin beach with their homemade bows and arrows. So I propose that it doesn't have to be like this. You can still be a modern, relevant, connected family in 2024 without letting phones take over every single aspect of your life and your children's lives. So I have chosen to reject the status quo with my own kids, and I have found that a surprising number of people are doing the same thing. You just don't hear about them because they're not talking about it on social media. So these are my digital media rules, and this is a list that is evolving. It has changed over the years. It will probably continue to change. I don't like to set things in stone too much because I just don't know, but I continue to learn. So I'm going to go through this list a little bit and share them with you. Delay, 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 of course, is the very first tactic that we take with everything. So like I said, none of my children have phones of their own. We've never had tablets in our house. And when asked when he can have a smartphone, for the longest time I have said I don't know, because I didn't want to lock myself in. I still don't know exactly, to be completely honest. Jean Twenge is a psychologist from San Diego State University who wrote a book called iGen and another one called Generations. She's a lead researcher in this area as well. And she recently said in a podcast that at age 16, her daughters can get smartphones because she considers to have a smartphone to be on par with having a driver's license. And you need the level of maturity to handle a car that's, the same as handling a smartphone. She said, however, at 16, her daughter still can't have any social media on that smartphone. So then that raises the question of what's the point of having a smartphone if you can't have social media on it, because then you're spending $1,000 on a phone that's really just calling and texting, and you could get a much cheaper phone to do the same thing. So I think that that's a good rule of thumb for a lot of parents to start, is to think about it. Your kids should be able to handle a car before you can give them something as powerful and as terrifying as a smartphone. No social media at all. Ideally until 18. So 18 is going to be the rule in our house for sure. Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Anxious Generation, says 16, but he also says that that's an absolute minimum. So social media is something that no minor should be on. There's really no benefits to it. And the studies are showing that it's incredibly damaging on a lot of different levels. No devices in bedrooms. Again, just a clear rule, if your children do have devices, then they should never be allowed to go into the bedroom at any point. They should always stay in a common area. No phones at schools. I'm going to get more into this as well, a contentious issue, but it's starting to heat up in the public debate, which I'm really excited to hear. You can use simpler devices, or you can use computers. So my kids are able to log in through a desktop computer in our home using my iMessage account. And they can text their friends. I guess it's using my email address to text their friends, but the difference is that if they want to communicate, they then don't have to go through me to do it. They can, arrange a study date or a play date or whatever, but they have to come into the house, they have to sit down at this computer that's in a common area, they log in, they send their message, and then they leave. They don't have it in their pocket. They're not going to be tempted to check it in 5 minutes' time when they're outside playing with their friends. They'll maybe take a look the next day when they're sitting back down in front of their computer again. And then to save screen time for special occasions. So we do enjoy watching movies occasionally, and that is a special event. So we will open up my laptop, this is what we have to watch movies on, and we'll do that on a rainy day or a sick day, or maybe on a Saturday night if my husband and I just want to sit down and watch a film with them. And that can be really special. And because it's not on a predictable schedule, the kids, they don't anticipate it. There's not that buildup or that entitlement that comes with having a set time for the weekly movie or something. So that has worked well for us. So what are the benefits of digital minimalism? Well, in many ways, they're sort of the inverse of the negatives that I went over earlier. You're going to have kids with better regulated emotions. So a lot of these devices we know are designed to heighten a child, to stimulate them and to engage them. And so when you get rid of them, you're going to have kids who are no longer going through that emotional roller coaster of anticipation and then let down, and then anticipation and then let down. Those dopamine surges that are coming constantly from using these devices. You're going to have kids who are a bit more creative, just by virtue of creating friction in their lives. And so I find this a really interesting point that we don't think about enough, how these devices eliminate friction. It's instant gratification the moment the child feels slightly bored, doesn't know what to do. They can get sucked right into that game. But it takes kids up to 45 minutes, I've read, for them to develop the rules of an imaginary game and assign roles to all their playmates and to come up with a plot line and then initiate the game. 45 minutes can seem like a lifetime to an adult. It seems ridiculous that they haven't even started their game yet and it's been almost an hour. And yet, it's because they have that friction that they're forced to do it. Instead, if we give them the devices, they get sucked in instantly and there's no hope of them putting in the hard work to actually develop their own game. You're going to have kids who are more focused. They're going to be more focused at school. We have to practice being focused on things in order to get better at it. And we're not giving kids enough opportunities to be focused and to get better at it as well. They're going to be able to read longer pieces of content, like read books. You're going to protect your kids from online nastiness. And honestly, for no other reason, I'd say just keep your kid out of the cesspool of social media and online drama as long as you possibly can. All these other issues aside, it's a vile world out there, and I hear heartbreaking stories of suicide attempts and successful suicides and just really, really heartbreaking bullying that's going on, even in our own region. And I think that it is not a place for kids to go at all. It will create less family tension. Devices are at the root of so many family fights. And you know, if you just get rid of the root cause, you're going to eliminate a lot of those arguments. And as a result, have higher quality relationships. When people are present, when they're showing up for each other, when they are sharing experiences and they're fully conscious for it, I believe that you're just going to have a higher quality life as a family. So implementing digital minimalism does rely on, I think of it as 3 different components. So you do have the parents. Parents are the biggest. Parents are the ones on the ground, in the home, doing the work of it every single day. We've got schools, and schools need to step up. I realize that this is an alternative to schools, so it's a little bit different. You have a bit more control over your own rules, which is wonderful. And then society. We have a responsibility to each other and to the other children, other people's children as well, to help create an environment that's conducive to fewer screens. Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about how this is a collective action problem. So he recognizes that a collective action problem is where one person knows that it would be good to take a certain action, but they're reluctant to do it because they will actually suffer if everyone's continuing to do the same thing. And so what we need is to get this critical mass of people to choose to live a certain way in order for it no longer to be harmful to a single individual who's choosing. So, for example, it sucks to be the one kid in a class who doesn't have a phone. It's a lot easier to be a kid in a class without a phone if half the class doesn't have a phone. And a lot of parents are giving their kids phones just because they don't want their kid to be left out. And that's not a great reason. But you can also understand why they would do it, but I'm trying to encourage people to resist, nevertheless. So, what can parents do? Well, parents can create strict rules around smartphone use in their homes and around social media. So I implement those rules that I went over earlier. A parent has to model good screen time habits, and I think that this is another major sticking point for families. It's that parents are coping with their own screen addiction as well, and so it can be very hard to crack down on kids when we know deep down that we need to crack down on ourselves as well. Parents need to reevaluate the concept of safety. So often phones are being given to their kids to keep them safe, and yet the world has never been a safer place than it is right now, statistically. It's the best time to be a kid in the world right now. In terms of criminality and death rates. So we need to reevaluate that and also step back to promote independence. So we have to, there's got to be this inversion where right now we are overprotecting kids in the real world and underprotecting them in the online world, and we need to flip that the other way around. So we need to become a lot more guarded about what they're doing on their devices and on the internet, and be a lot less worried about sending them out into the world and trusting them to be fine, just like we were. Assign chores. You know, I think that, you know, those hours that I cited at the very beginning, the range of time that kids are spending on their devices every day, 5.5 hours to 8.5 hours a day, a lot of that could be filled in much more constructive ways, like helping out around the house. You know, my kids have lists of things that they have to do every day, and there's days where I very much wish we lived on a farm like you do, where I could really fill up their list. It's a little harder in a town, but you know, I think as parents, we often tend to just do stuff for our kids without recognizing that as they grow up, they should be pitching in more and more and doing more of the meal prep and maybe doing some grocery shopping and doing the laundry and whatnot. Set high standards too. Kids will rise to the standards that you set for them, or at least they will strive to rise for them, and strive to rise to them. And I think that we're often too quick to assume that the next generation's weaker than we were. Well, we grew up without these devices and we were perfectly fine. We can expect them to be capable of doing the exact same thing. And then you have to help them to fill the void that is left when you remove these devices from their life. That is my next slide. Yes, so parents have to help their kids learn how to entertain themselves offline. So now I'm kind of moving into these scenarios where, let's say your kid has been using devices and you want to get them off. You can do that no matter what, no matter their age, no matter how deeply ingrained you are into these devices. And it's known as the replacement phase that comes initially. So it's when you take the devices away, and there will be meltdowns. Of course there's going to be pushback. The kid is never going to say, "That's such a great idea, Mom." You have to decide, and then you have to stick to it. You have to be consistent, and that's when you fill your house with alternatives and other activities for them. So, you know, go to the library, have a fresh supply of books every week if you can. Get some art supplies. Get open-ended, loose part toys. You know, fill your backyard with buckets and shovels and rope and like all kinds of random things, hammers and nails and boards of wood, things that your kids can use to build things and to have fun and explore. Get them playing sports. Like if you're a family that will benefit from a few more extracurricular structured activities, that's not a bad thing to do. You don't want to overbook yourself either, because kids need free time to explore. Chores, like I mentioned, family activities. Eventually this replacement phase gives way to just an enrichment phase, where the child is then going to be independent, they're going to be able to occupy themselves, and you can step back as the parent and, you know, still show up for them, of course. I think that when you're a screen-free parent, you are more hands-on. You do have a responsibility to take your kid outside for a bike ride, or go camping in the summer, and just invite friends over, have a dinner party, or things like this, where you're bringing people into your home. But ultimately, you end up making your job easier because you have kids that are not dealing with a severe screen addiction. Embrace messiness and noise. I have visited many families' homes where the houses have kids in them, but you wouldn't know it because they're completely silent. The kids are tucked away in their rooms with their doors closed on their phones. And I find that very sad. And I know some of those friends come to my house and find it overwhelming because I have 3 boys plus whoever else has showed up that day running around, and it can be very chaotic. But I told myself that it's a temporary stage in life, and there's going to come a time, not that long in the future, when I'm going to look back and I'm going to miss all of the laughter and the noise, and even the wrestling and the fighting, and the incessant questions, and all of just the beautiful chaos that comes with having young kids in a home. Parents need to recognize boredom as a rich and creative state. So kids have a marvelous ability to figure out things to do when you leave them alone. And I think that you have to sort of get over that hump of being worried, like, are they going to be okay? How are they going to entertain themselves for the morning? But if you just get out of their way, they will do things. They will find things to do always. So I did mention the issue of safety. Kids do not need phones to be safe, in my opinion. So phones have been described as the world's longest umbilical cord, which I found amusing. To give a child a phone for the purpose of safety, I believe, is to put a tremendous burden on a single piece of technology. Anything can go wrong with that phone. So it could break, it could get stolen, it could fall in a puddle, anything could happen to it. And then if you have not taught your kid how to navigate the world, the real world, with offline screen-free skills, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble, and they're going to feel a lot less capable. Giving them a phone, of course, is a portal into all of the ugliness of the world. So really, what is safe? What is safety? Like, do you not want to protect their minds as much as you want to protect their bodies? Often, you know, I think it's easier to fix the body problems than it is to fix the mind problems. Like, I'd rather be dealing with broken limbs than a kid that has, you know, been exposed to some really ugly things on the internet. So it's important to teach real-life coping skills. And kids will handle situations differently when they don't have a phone. In fact, I think that they will become a bit more risk-averse. So I had a chat with a mother in Vancouver who has 2 teenage daughters who take public transit every day in Vancouver. They don't have phones. And these girls were telling their mother that they are hyper-alert when they're standing at a bus stop. They're hyper-alert to who's around them. They know exactly, you know, if there's a creepy-looking man who's approaching them and coming over to speak, and they'll move away. And they're attuned to their surroundings. And they were telling their mom, our friends aren't like this. Our friends are standing there, they have their headphones on, they're looking at their phones, they're in a bubble. They're completely clueless as to what's happening around them. And I find that really troubling, the fact that they think that the presence of the device is somehow going to, you know, potentially save them from some unsavory interaction. A kid can always find a phone to reach you too. So I'm always getting texts on my phone from unknown numbers that I've never seen before, and it's, you know, my various children letting me know from someone else's phone that they've decided to stay for football practice, or, you know, go to the rugby game, or whatever it might be after school. And that works perfectly fine for me. Also, incessant parental communication is a real problem. You know, we're not letting the kids separate, individuate from the parents as they are meant to do at a certain stage in life. A lot of parents are communicating with their kids during school hours, which is deeply disrespectful to the teachers, and it's also inhibiting the process of learning that needs to be occurring. And then there's the worst case lockdown scenario, which a lot of parents, especially in the States, say my kid has to have a phone in the case of a school shooting. But what we know is that kids on phones is actually the worst thing you could ever have in one of those situations, when silence is absolutely critical. So you can use simpler devices as well. If you want to be able to call and text your teenager for whatever reason, you can do that. There are so many options still out there on the market. There's the light phone, number 2, which is coming to Canada this year. The US has a lot of really neat looking options. The Wise phone looks just like a smartphone, so that a child doesn't feel quite as conspicuous holding it out, but it's just a basic flip phone essentially. And then there's some other companies that are making good devices. Some parents will use watches. Gizmo Watch is quite common for younger kids. Apple Watch I've heard of, but I have heard mixed reports on that. I don't have one, I don't know about that as well. Computers, again, for direct messaging, like I mentioned. Kids can still communicate with each other using a computer, and again, you're just making it a little bit harder. They're not carrying it with them, so they have to choose consciously when to use it and when not. And then, honestly, we just discuss our schedule in person every single day. It's kind of an old-fashioned method, but it doesn't break. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. We sort of have this family meeting at breakfast where we say, where does everyone have to be today? And we leave sticky notes for each other on the door if anything's changed. I'll let them know if I'm going to be late and whatnot. So there are definitely ways to stay connected. This is an interesting list of what an 18-year-old should be able to do. And it came from a book called How to Raise an Adult, written by Julie Lythcott-Haims, former Dean of Freshmen at Stanford University. And Lythcott-Haims had found that all of these first-year university students were coming in and they couldn't do anything. And so she wrote this book, and she made this list, and I find it really helpful. An 18-year-old should be able to talk to strangers, find her way around a new location, manage school assignments independently, contribute to the running of a household, cope with the ups and downs of life, earn and manage money, and take risks. But I think what's key here is that an 18-year-old doesn't wake up knowing how to do these things. So training for all of these things starts from birth. And I think that we as parents really need to be chipping away at these. Like, this is a long cumulative process that takes 18 years, but we have to be doing it every single day. And when our kids are just spending 8-9 hours a day on their phones, they're not developing these kinds of skills that they need eventually. Parental modeling is, of course, the most powerful teaching tool that we have. We have a responsibility to mentor our kids and to think about the examples that we're setting. I love this quote from Sherry Turkle. She's a professor at MIT. She wrote, "In every culture, young children want the objects of grown-up desire." So I've actually become something of an advocate for analog ways of doing things. So I think that the smartphone in many ways has become desirable because it combines so many different functions, but it's kind of fun when you start taking out those individual functions. So I have, you know, a planner, and I have an alarm clock, and I have a calculator, and I have all of these other things. And it also helps the child to learn how to live, because when you just pull out a phone to do all of those things, your kid doesn't really know what you're doing. You know, whereas when I open up a cookbook and start flipping through it to try to find a recipe to make for dinner, my 9-year-old totally understands exactly what I'm doing. So I think that has benefits for sure. And then you're just going to be more focused on your kid too. What can schools do? I believe that schools have a responsibility to ban phones. So this is an ongoing discussion. I was involved in that lawsuit that just came out. It was announced a few weeks ago with the school boards in Canada that are banning, or they're suing social media companies to the tune of $4 billion, saying that kids are not having an adequate education as a result of how distracting these devices are. However, even though I was consulted by the law firm, and it was a very interesting process, I also feel like the schools are passing the buck a little bit, and really, they could be implementing changes today that could be helping these kids instead of just pushing it off down the road for a court date several years in the future when, you know, these tech companies finally show up, which they probably won't. So if we really cared about the kids, we would get rid of the phones in the classroom right now. We know that heavy phone users have low GPAs. They are struggling to focus on tests. Even just the mere proximity of a phone correlates to lower test scores, even if the kid can't see it. When they know it's in their desk, when it's in their pocket, when it's in their backpack, they still have trouble focusing on it. Also, so phubbing means it's a portmanteau of the term phone snubbing, and this is happening a lot even among adults, where if you don't want to have a conversation with somebody, you just pull out your phone, and immediately the person is snubbed. They're shut down. They know that you're no longer available to talk. And this is happening in schools. And schools are where kids need to be connecting. They have to be practicing. Again, it's that rehearsal for adulthood. They're practicing having conversations with people. So that's important. And we know that when schools do get rid of phones, everybody is happier. You have a better school culture, more focus in class, more interactions among students. I think that we should be thinking of school as this 6-hour window every single day where the kids can be phone free. So in a way, it gives them a chance, even if they come from a home where it's saturated in phone use and they're getting those, 8, 9, 10, 12 hours of screen time for entertainment outside of school hours, at least they can be guaranteed 6 hours off screen. It levels the playing field. All of the kids then come down to the same level, they're all present for the same experiences, and they can finally start to connect. Even just a memo issued by a principal at the beginning of the school year saying, we support delaying phone ownership. We will support parents who do that. We urge you not to let your kids go on social media until they're graduated from high school. I think that would go a long way toward really empowering those parents who are kind of on the fence and just don't know what the norm is. Lastly, what can society do? We have a responsibility toward our own children, but also to other people's children. We need to put our phones away more, and we have to ask kids to do the same. So I will do that when my kids' friends come over to play. I'll say, please leave your phone here. This is going to be a phone-free play date. Now go outside. We'll leave it in the kitchen. Of course, they always come back to the kitchen. It's quite amazing how magnetic that thing is, and then I have to shoo them off again. We should, like I said, establish phone-free zones, whether it's play dates, whether it's sleepovers. And trust me, other parents will thank you. If you have a phone-free rule in your home for play dates when other kids come over, the other parents would be so grateful that someone else is willing to draw that line and be that, bad guy. I think we need to stop posting so much online. We have to stop talking about online content as much as we do. It's been interesting just to look at the trajectory of conversation topics over the last century. There's some interesting surveys that look at it. And recently, most people just talk about what they see online, and especially teenagers. It's an exchange of memes and an exchange of TikTok content. And they're just sharing observations. It's not even a discussion of the things that they're seeing. They're just sparring and sharing. So that's not a great way to develop conversation skills. We need to promote neighborliness and not be suspicious of children playing outside. In a lot of urban areas, people will call the police, especially in the States, if they see kids playing outside in a park alone. And I think we really need to get rid of that attitude and start welcoming. We have some wonderful neighbors who made it very clear to us from years ago, saying our kids were welcome to play in their backyard. So that essentially expanded our backyard space times 4, because there's no fences, but now they can, they can play tag. Their manhunt games are epic, they tell me. We need to advocate for urban areas that welcome older children in particular, because I think that a lot of our playgrounds and splash pads and things like that focus on toddlers and preschoolers and young children. But as they get older, there's fewer and fewer options for kids to go. There's the skate park in Port Elgin. We have the beach, which is really great. But apart from that, it can be really hard for kids who are 12, 13 and up to know where to go. We don't have shopping malls even anymore. Despite all the problems that those came with. But there's fewer and fewer of those common areas for children to gather, and more incentives for them just to be in their rooms playing video games. We need to seek community and like-minded families, and those people are out there. You will find them the more you start talking about this. And then there are some people who are advocating for play streets and play days. So this is happening a bit more in the UK, where there will be neighborhoods where they shut down a street for one Saturday every single month to cars, and then all of the children in that area can come out and just play in the street for an entire day. So I like to tell parents it's never too late. It doesn't matter how old your kids are, how long you've been doing it, whether or not they're fully phone-addled or not. You can trust your intuition, first of all, and you have the right to change your mind. So you can come back to a kid and you can say, based on new information that I've acquired, I'm no longer comfortable with you spending as much time as you are on a device. They don't have to like it. They won't like it. But it is absolutely legitimate for you to do that. And in fact, it's necessary. And your child, I think, will thank you someday for it. You're not alone. Luddism is in. I mean, I use this term a little bit jokingly. Luddism, of course, refers to Luddites, who are people who like to reject new technologies just on principle. But I am kind of hopeful. I'm seeing a lot more headlines that are suggesting that people are becoming more alarmed about the prevalence of digital media in kids' lives. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think one of the best news stories was last year a group of American teens in Brooklyn got rid of their smartphones and they've started Luddite clubs. So these are kids who have just said, they're trying to preserve their own personal privacy a little bit and regain control over their minds and their time. And so they all have retro flip phones and they read books for fun, which is kind of cool. So, is the future analog? I like to leave listeners with this thought. So I've inverted the title of a Canadian author, David Sachs's book last year. He wrote The Future is Analog. And his whole thesis in that book is that the pandemic gave us the digital future that we were promised for so long, and we hated it. You know, in a way it was a blessing, because it showed us that all the things that we really care the most about in life are the real things, the active things, the in-person things, the outdoor things. And we cannot lose sight of that, you know, with our children. I think that we need to take those lessons and apply them to our kids and realize we do not want them to live in that digital saturated environment that we had to suffer through for those several years. I do not buy the idea that we need to be teaching kids how to use technology from a young age, because first of all, it is highly intuitive. We all learned it late in life and we're doing just fine. And secondly, the technology is evolving so fast that there's no way it's going to look the same in 10 or 15 years' time as it does right now. So we don't need to worry about that. What we need to be worrying about is if we are teaching our kids the skills that set them apart from the devices. So the skills that really make them human and enable them to communicate and to connect with other people, because that is what's going to set them apart. So the last quote I have here is from Adam Grant. He said, "The skills that make us human are increasingly important to master." So I think that that's valuable advice for all of us. So that concludes my presentation. I do have some copies of my book if you don't have any, but I do also encourage you to subscribe to this newsletter I've been writing. It's called The Analog Family. It's online, it's free, and I write about 2 articles every single week, just talking about various aspects of these issues, some of the newest research, as well as just what it's like to raise digital minimalist children in small town Ontario. So please check that out. Thank you, and I would love to hear any of your reactions, questions, thoughts on what I've had to say tonight. Yes?
How do you handle play dates with your kids? Because we don't do the video games and all of that. And I have a 10-year-old who everybody's big on video games, and they talk about it outside and in other groups about, you know, their status and how many things they've done and where they're at in a video game. So if he does get any time with social media, he watches other kids play video games so he can contribute to the conversation. And then he wants to do play dates with kids so he can go and play video games. So I struggle with that because, you know, we don't do it and then everybody else does it.
Yeah.
So how do you handle talking to the parents about, my son can come over, but not just to sit for 4.5 hours and play video
So you're talking about when your son goes to someone else's house?
Yes, that.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah, because like you said, I'm not going to helicopter parent and say, you just have to have friends over at our house because my rules are what is aligned with us. I want to let him go free, but it's always video games when he goes anywhere.
So that is something that I've had to accept, actually, because I realize that I can only control my own home environment. I don't presume to impose my digital minimalist philosophy on other parents, because that's just not fair. I mean, I can choose not to send my kid there, but I can't say, you can have my kid over, but you also have to parent the way that I parent.
Yeah.
So my kids go to their friends' houses and they play a lot of video games.
A lot, yeah.
And it does drive me nuts. And so my point of influence is through them. Like I will often say to Alex, sorry to pick on the spot here, but I'll say ride your bike to your friend's house and take a football or a soccer ball in your backpack. And so I find that I encourage him to then encourage his friends to go do things actively, and it works. It often does. So usually they do play video games, which also keeps him relevant then, I guess, in that sense. Like you said, at least there is a point of common connection that he knows what the games are and what they're doing. I do try to minimize it as much as I can. We're not doing play dates on a super regular basis. But what I've been curious to learn is that often his friends are quite eager to get off the devices. As soon as there's an alternative that's been presented by the other kid, they will go for it because there's not many kids that are suggesting that. So it's, yeah.
The question I have is about withdrawal, because it's the withdrawal issue when kids have been really involved in it. It is comparable to heavy drug use, and I think a lot of parents are actually not capable of dealing with that, with the withdrawal, and that's why they then rather give in than trying to really make a point of it. But is there a point of no return? That's my question in some cases.
I don't think that there's ever a point of no return, because the point of no return is when you've got a kid who's committed suicide because they've been so severely bullied online. You know, like I think that you can always, and you always should, intervene to help your child. For the situations like that, there's a wonderful resource called screenstrong.org. So I recommend that if you're dealing with things like that, check that out. It's run by a woman, she's a nurse in the States, whose son became a severe video game addict. And she realized that, I think she had 5 or 6 kids, he was the oldest, and she realized she had to parent in a completely different way with her younger kids, and now she's become like no phones, like there's no devices in their home at all until they leave high school. So she has a lot of resources for actually dealing with the withdrawal.
There was a documentary about China, I don't know if you saw that, where they have actually boot camps.
Oh, I've heard of that, yes.
Yeah, boot camps for withdrawal, and they show some of these kids how they are. I mean, it's hard to watch that, you know, how these kids are so addicted to that, and then they don't have it anymore, and how they need to kind of guide them along, literally like completely sort of handicapped children. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
there
an
are-
extreme case.
There are some boot camps like that here too, digital
Oh, they
detox
are?
camps, yeah, where you can send your kid for 2 to 4 weeks in the summer to get them off
Yeah.
video games.
Yeah.
But the problem, it's almost like it can be a necessity, but you have to change the home environment
Oh, yeah.
completely when they come
Yeah.
back, and it's hard, even socially, right? Because you then are gonna be dealing with things like the play dates and really reining that in. But I think it's much better to nip it in the bud as much as you can.
Yes.
The earlier you intervene, the better. And because this is your chance to establish habits that the child is then going to carry forward in life. You know, this is not something that you want to expose them to in order to help them manage it better. Really, the most successful cases are kids who have not been on these devices, have not been on these screens, and then by the time they reach the age of 16, 18 and up, they are well established enough as a human being with hobbies and interests and friendships and whatnot that those devices will not completely derail them. So.
That was an interesting experience I had I was in a restaurant in Meaford, I think, and we were sitting there, and then behind us was this kind of noise coming, and I look around, and there is a couple there, and they have a little 3-year-old, 2-year-old on the iPad, and I look at them and didn't want to say anything. I just look at them, and then the mother looks at me and said, "I don't know how parents raise their kids before iPads." You know?
Yeah.
Because that is also one thing that it's in a way for parents easy. I don't want to bother, you know, doing something with a kid. Why don't I just let them do their iPad or you know, the cell phone? And it's an activating the parents and say, well, do you know what? There's a responsibility to actually do something with your children.
Yeah.
So,
No, I know. It is tough,
yeah.
for sure. But I think that you have to choose what's going to be tough for you. You know, yeah, it can be harder to have a 2-year-old who's running around a restaurant that you're trying to subdue and get to interact with you and wait for food while they're hungry. But it's a lot harder, arguably, to have a kid who's addicted to their video games and, you know, is failing school and has no friends and is not communicating with you. And like, there's just, you choose your battles. And for me, I think one battle is a lot more desirable to have than another battle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I raise my kids right in the middle of town, in Little Durham, and you know, it used to break my heart when you stopped just listening out the window and hearing children, like, didn't, you know, when they were little, it was still happening. But I found out that my son would go to the library, and the library was pushing all these computer programs and would not allow you to not allow your child on the computer. So if I couldn't find him suddenly, I'd be like, where is he? And then I'd call the library, and he was on the computer at the library.
Oh. That's so frustrating.
That's just, really?
Yeah.
A library, you know?
We were at the Owen Sound one on the Earth Day, and my son was like, oh, the Owen Sound library is there, because Earth Day was right there, and he went to the library. And I said, was it busy? He goes, all the kids were on the computers at the library, Mom. And I was like, oh no, you found out there's computers at the library. But he said they were playing video games at the library on the computer, so that was news to me.
Is that not something that could change?
It is, I mean,
You know?
and it should. I would say talk to the library for sure and complain about that.
I mean, the brand new high school had like a shelf this big with a couple books, and the rest of the library was computers in the new school.
No, I know. There's this push to just force the technology on the kids. It's quite excessive at times. Again, I would say, tell your kid you're not going on the computer at the library. It's like you can influence your child. Maybe you can try to influence the library, but I would say make that rule in your family, for sure. But it's hard. Yes?
Yeah, what's really speaking to me about this is the need to find your community. Because the isolation that the children, ironically, might feel being on devices all the time. I don't know. I wonder about that. Our children are still quite young, but I'm also wondering about, I remember when I was in high school, we had, I really enjoyed it, it was a social media class or something, and they were kind of teaching us how to manage this sort of manipulative messages that were coming to us. And I'm wondering, do you know about if that kind of curriculum's happening in schools? And also, at what point should we be like actively educating our children about the dangers of digital media?
I don't know about curriculum. I'm actually not sure what they're talking about in the schools exactly. I think that we should always be talking to our kids about what's online. I'm often asking my boys, what are your friends doing? What kinds of things are you seeing them do? Because of course, everyone has their phones out in class for the entire class. So they're picking up on what's going on all around them. So I think that it's important for the kids to be aware of what's happening. I ask them questions about, like we talk about social media influencers, we talk about porn, like we talk about certain things. And of course it's surface level discussions, but I think that there's got to be an awareness there for sure. I don't want them to be completely naive. But it's at least these conversations are happening within a context. There's like background, it's happening with a parent who's discussing it, instead of just like throwing the stuff at the kid and then not providing any kind of background. So, yeah, and I talk to them a lot about what I'm trying to do, how I'm trying to fill their time with other more formative, rich, exciting experiences rather than empty scrolling online. So, I don't know. I think all we can do is just to keep discussing it as much as possible.
I don't, because I came in a bit later, so I'm not sure if you touched on this, but I'm curious about how you approach teens. You were talking about not having any devices until after high school. And so when they're in a high school with all the others that have them, how do they navigate like lunchtime, for example, when everybody else pretty much has a device and they're either out on their phone doing things, scrolling or whatever, or texting or something, and not, not really connecting.
So I would say one benefit.
That I have an 18-year-old that's in grade 12.
One benefit I've realized is that I have sons, and I think that boys are not as like. Alex tells me that his friends are not on their phones at lunch. They're outside playing football, and they're playing soccer.
Last year.
That was last year? But now you go to Tim Hortons and stuff and walk down the street, don't you? Okay.
And what grade is?
Grade 9. But another example, he was away for OFSA for Nordic Skiing this winter, and he was saying how the boys in their hotel rooms were playing cards. And a girl came in and she's like, oh my gosh, all the boys are playing cards. Like, you guys are having fun in your room. She's like, all the girls are on their phones. So I do think, and we do know that girls and boys are affected differently, especially by social media. Boys tend to be sucked more into video games, girls tend to be sucked more into Instagram and TikTok. And so there is a susceptibility there. I do hear from the parents of my friends who have teenage daughters who are his age. It's a real issue. The girls just aren't talking to each other at all. I don't know how I would handle that as much. I think that doesn't mean that I'm going to give them a phone just because everyone else is doing it. I think that's when you maybe need to talk to other parents and say, look, can you get your kid to commit to not being on their phone during lunchtime so that my kid doesn't feel left out for that period of time? And if you can kind of get that critical mass of like 3, 4, or 5 kids who are all agreeing to that. And I'm sure parents would get behind that too, because they want to have a reason to tell their kids to get off devices. I think then you might be able to start to change the culture a bit. Work with the school, ask for phone free.
And it's different, like, my son brings his lunch, most of the kids go out and buy junk food.
Yeah. It's another issue,
And
yes.
so there's that kind of thing, it's like, yeah, fine. But at the same time, he's like gonna be graduating and I'm preparing for my daughter, who's 11 and gonna be coming up through all of that, but
It is
too late. He's got a phone and it's like, it's too late now to take it away, I feel, but at this point, I don't know.
No, it's hard. You do need to find that community, like mentioned before. Jonathan Haidt talks about that a lot too. He says, start talking to your kids' friends, parents, and try to just get other people on board, because we need other people who are agreeing to wait, and then pushing the schools to wait as well. So, yeah.
And the banning of the phones, like, that's not common. There aren't that many schools that are doing that.
Not there. No, not yet. Hopefully more.
Yes.
I hear there are some school boards that are well funded by media and technology companies, so it's a real, yeah. And I mean, I'm thinking about, okay, so what is any movement happening, any kind of like lobby group or political action that's happening to try and, like, to me, you say the research always lags behind practice, 10 years or whatever, right? Like, how can we help push this into the public school system, for example, even locally at our local school board? Is there do you know of anything going on in that
I think
realm?
this is such a new conversation, honestly. Like, I think people are, even in the past year since the book came out, like, the number of news headlines that are now coming out, I feel like people are finally starting to wake up to the fact that this is an issue and that it doesn't have to be this way. So no, I don't actually know of any groups yet, but I think the time is ripe for it. I really think that, I'm going to be starting to fight his school about trying to ban phones for next fall if possible. I don't know if Blue Water's going to go for it, who knows? But that's going to be my next war. I'm preparing for it.
What's the pushback? I'm really curious to know what the school would say is the problem with that idea.
Oh, exactly. I know.
Right-wing
You
extremists.
can't really argue against that.
Or is it funded by social media, like you're saying?
Wow.
Start
Well, I don't
there.
know about social media. Like, I interviewed Richard Lowe for my book. He's the guy who wrote Last Child in the Woods. He's quite a well-known environmental figure in the States. And he was talking a lot about Microsoft's investment in schools. And even these Chromebooks, there was an article about it, some newspaper I read recently, how when you give every student a Chromebook, not only are you making the money off the Chromebooks, but you are buying lifetime future customers who want your software, because they
Break the phone.
become used to it. So it is an issue for sure.
I know in schools they don't like taking phones away because they're so expensive. So if the kids are bringing them to school and then they're trying to confiscate them, it's a real issue. Just like what happens if the phone gets lost or broken, who's responsible for it? So that would be a big issue of trying to get it out of the public school system.
Well, ideally they should just not bring them at all.
That would be a big
Yeah.
deal.
But then you can also buy phone lockers, which are like little pouches that each kid can lock their phone up. And I think it does sort of give it a bit of security, like there's a bit of padding to it. And then you are not allowed to take it out of the phone locker until the end
Yeah,
of
I
the
think
day.
it'd be a good idea to have those kind of suggestions in place, because that would be one thing to be like, what do we do with this? So.
Yeah.
The other thing I worry about seeing the kids with their cell phones is I watch the girls and they put it in their bras and in their back pocket. How many cancers? How many cancers are these kids going to get? I don't think it's so
Next to the
sad.
head all night.
Yeah, sleeping with it. No, it's true.
Well, I have noticed that, like, growing, like, we have a big Amish community around us, and I know our neighbors, when he was 9 years old, he was able to run the whole farm, He knew when you do the seeding, and what you do it with, and when you do it with, and he could go get the horses, and I would make up these songs all the time, and one day I was there, and I would sing a song, and the next week I'd come back and, oh, is there any more words to that song? And I was like, what's this kid talking about? Which song? And then, even though I only sang that song that I just made up once, he was able to repeat the words back to me, what the song was. And I was like, wow. When you're not watching cartoons all day you know, you might have a different kind of focus in the people around you. And that was, I always remark on that. It was quite amazing, and it's a real gift that we have those Amish around to be able to, it's almost like Star Trek or something, you know? Be able to jump into this other world and see how it's existing and how people are functioning in it, you know, and that it's possible. And I tell them all the time that they're holding something very important. And there's a few different communities that are intertwined, and it seems to me that it's almost like they hold time. They're time holders. There's some that are like from the 1920s, and then there's like others that are like 1940s, and then others in the 50s, and then there's like Michael Schmidt, right? but they seem to hold time, you know, in these ways, and they're saying that, well, this technology, we're going to go to this level and stay at that level for the most part.
So they're the original techno-selectionists, you know, they've recognized that certain technology is serving them and others not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and their elders sort of do that. And it's a closed community, but they know what they want, and they maintain it, you know, for better or worse, and they seem to be thriving with it, you know.
The fact is that technology, as it developed, it's the first time that we have a technology which actually damages the soul life, or, you know, the well-being of a person. Before it was, okay, you have a tractor instead of the horse, you know, you have a car instead of walking, whatever. But this time it really kind of affects the brain development, and this is the danger. And we haven't even talked about now also the next wave is the artificial intelligence wave, you know, which comes in, which clouds completely, you know, that is there actually an identity to what you're doing, or is it now message through AI into, you know, so you even don't know with whom you're acting anymore. So I think parents should not underestimate the danger for their children, what they're actually exposing their children to.
And to just view these years as important years to be investing in the child's development. You know, you're going to set that kid loose in the world eventually, and they will use all these tools and these devices and these phones, and they will have emails and texts waiting for them to respond to. But, you know, give them the gift of a childhood, and, you know, let them have a play-based childhood instead of a phone-based childhood, and they'll do better. I really believe that they'll do better in the world.
I want to share a story of our son, who's almost 17 now, but when he was 16 or 15 and 16, he was in Germany on exchange, and his host family had, the kids all above a certain age had devices, and Wi-Fi was on certain times and then got shut off. And the observation, he didn't have a phone, of course, and he was like, so boring. I mean, he's in a house full of teenagers, and every single one of them are in their own rooms doing their own thing, and then when the internet went off, they had already downloaded stuff, and they could still like do stuff. And he was like, it's just crazy. Yeah. And he actually thanked us for not letting him have a phone, because he saw from the outside how unsocial. And he said, I played piano for 4 hours every day. Everybody else was like in their rooms.
Yeah.
So you see that, you know, and then, you know, you're visiting, and it comes the time when the Wi-Fi goes off, and then all of a sudden you see all the teenagers. And then they're like, can we have Wi-Fi? No. I just wanted to finish one thing.
Yes.
So what we have here, really, I see is a battlefield, right? And we have two sides. We have parents, a lot of them are burned out, and either A, want their children off, you know, better for them, they're trying to do that, minimize or take it away completely, and that's good. And you've got some parents that are just so tired of fighting all society and all the pressures, they can't do anything. They're in a rock and hard place, be it the job or their relationships or their society at large. So then you've got other factions who want the children to keep on using this technology, right? Like we just learned, some public schools are, you know, or in libraries are being funded to have PCs and whatever like that. So, but the casualties would be not just the children, but society at large anyways, right? So it has to be from the bottom up, which is the parents and the children, but it also has to be from the top down, something in our country that is a unified effort to say this has to stop. As Canadian citizens, for example, right? There has to be, you know, and it's massive, right? Because you've got, it's like oil. Like we keep saying get off of oil, right? But there's, for years, it's been companies like that who, you know, will not let that happen. There's too much money at stake there, right? To also step away from that, right? But the same idea with this. There's too much going on with technology and too much money being made, right? But again, it's just a bottom up from a renewed effort and organized groups for parents and alternatives to the phones, right? Which you discussed, or we discussed here. But also from top down of governments. I hate to use the word government because, yeah. But there has to be some kind of fundamental changes, right? Fundamental changes from top down. And until that happens, this is just a mess. And we all know it's a mess. And that's why I say it's a battlefield. And like I say, the prize is our children. And, you know, from whatever young age up through teens and into their...
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Starting from the bottom, I think it can feel very overwhelming if you think about the whole thing and daunting, and a lot of people just throw up their hands and say there's no point. But I think that you can't do that. In fact, if you break it down and you just look at your home environment, you can do a lot in your home environment. You know, I may not actually end up changing anything with all the work that I'm doing, but at least I know that I'm, you know, creating a home environment that I believe is the best possible environment for my 3 children. The top level changes, absolutely. We need age verification. That's one of the first things that we need. So these social media companies have set 13 as this arbitrary age when kids can sign up for social media. That's insane. We need new legislation that actually creates a higher adult age of internet majority, which should be at least 16. Hopefully older, but 16
how do they
is...
know they're telling the truth from their birthday?
Well, so then there's ways that needs to be verified. So
Which is AI.
another issue.
Scan your retina.
You should read Jonathan Haidt's book. It's fantastic. Just came out a few weeks ago, The Anxious Generation, and he talks about all of these different solutions. We've got the UK looking right now into not selling smartphones to under 16.
Not selling what?
Smartphones. So you would not even be able to buy a smartphone if your kid was under the age of 16. So it's kind of like buying cigarettes or alcohol. You'd have to show ID, or a parent would have to, you know, prove that the kid is a certain age before they'll actually give them the device. So little things like that might start to sort of shift things from a top level, but...
And sustainable too, you know?
Yeah, it's true. But Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. The Anxious Generation. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, just having words, like you've brought like digital minimalist, or techno-selectionist, or the Luddite clubs, just even have those words in the vocabulary adds a little shift. You know, if those words are more common, even that would help, I think, you know.
I think so. It makes it a little less scary too. You know, to say digital minimalist shows that like you can still be relevant, you can still know what's going on in the world and have a phone that people can reach you on, but you're refusing to let it take over every aspect of your life.
Yeah. And I just wanted to laugh because I know in our day it was TV. Oh, people are watching too much TV and it's so passive. And now, you know, you'd watch Bart Simpson who would go and like hug the TV and like, thanks for raising me, you know. But the opening is all the family going whoop, onto the couch together, and now it's like everyone's in a different room on their own device. And I was like, whoa, it even worse, went worse, right? Like it's just wild, right?
Oh,
It seems
it's a far
quaint
less
now
yeah,
to have a
yeah.
TV and have everyone lose their mind there.
It's were the good old days, you know?
Yes.
You mentioned the importance of the home environment, and you mentioned the analog tools instead of relying on the phone. I'm just curious what kind of guidelines you have for your own use of phone at home, because I would like to do better in my place. I feel like I use my phone for everything, for work, and just trying to set a better example. So, yeah.
I struggle with it too. I do, especially because I work online, so there's that, and I work from home. So it can be very hard to create that delineation. I really do, I try to finish work for 3:15, 3:20, which is when the kids come home from school, and just like not be on my computer or my phone as much as I can during those hours. Same with my husband. I mean, we're just conscious of that, but it is a challenge for sure. And like I said, I will not ever use my phone to like cook. You know, I have a cookbook collection. I never read on my phone. I would rather, you know, subscribe to magazines or get newspapers or read books at home. I have a paper planner. You know, my kids will see me writing down my appointments there. I'm trying to think. But yeah, I do try to pull functions out of the phone and just do them in analog form as much as I possibly can so that I don't have it with me. And we went through a phase where we were doing the tech Shabbat as well, which is like the one day of completely unplugging. That didn't last only because we don't have a landline, and the landlines were really expensive to install, so we ended up just, it kind of petered out. But that can be a good approach for some families as well, when everyone just puts it away for a full 24 hours a week.
The interesting thing is that COVID actually opened a lot of eyes for people who saw the devastating effect of kids online and so on, where they then afterwards made conscious decisions in regards to, you know, what the kids should do and what not. So in a way there was a certain blessing with COVID happening, that they realized how devastating the effects are when they're constantly on a device. So we need another pandemic or so.
Don't call that out.
It's on the way anyway.
I'm curious to know whether you had published, whether you have a publisher or whether you're self-published.
It was, I have a publisher. Yeah.
And so because of this topic, was it hard to get a publisher?
No, actually, no. I sent them my proposal and they loved it. So it was quite an easy process. I hadn't shopped it around. I kind of had a relationship with this publisher because I'd worked as a journalist for so many years, and they would send me a lot of books to review as my job. So I kind of had this steady stream of free books coming from them. And so I knew them, and then I said, hey, you know, I'm thinking about writing this book. And they said, yes, please send us a proposal, because they knew my work. So
Right.
it was kind of this mutually beneficial
Because this is
arrangement that we
against
came to.
like mainstream, and so it's so
Yeah,
out
it's
there.
a
and
small,
like, is it a sell, and it, you know, and all of
it's a
that.
small publisher based in BC.
Okay.
Books to change the world or something, you know, it's a lot of sort of off the beaten track kind of
Right.
publications. So this was a little different. They hadn't done any parenting, like technology stuff before, but they were willing to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I believe that Ontario schools are supposed to be cell phone free. I think it is already in, like, they recently announced that in Quebec, now they're not allowed to have cell phones in school. And I remember it being like, in Ontario, we're not allowed to have cell phones in school. The trouble was that the school staff, teachers, and weren't willing to enforce it. So it becomes about enforcement anyways, like even with Saugeen Academy here, we have no cell phones, parents all agree, yet it's a slippery slope that it's oh, I forgot to take it out of my bag, and then it's like, oh, I'm just gonna go down where there's nobody, and then they're on it, and it's like, oh, it's in the building, you know, like, and if it was in the class, I'm 100% sure that every teacher would be like, no, but it's just like, at lunch, and you go off the property, and then you're like, you have to use your phone to buy, so you have to have, it's everything, it's my camera, it's my calculator, it's my everything. That's why all my bank cards are in there. I need that, it's my everything. And that's part of the problem, and I think you touched on it a bit. It's like, use a calculator, use a camera, use a flashlight, use...
Even cash, the kids don't know how to use money now because
Yeah.
they just tap their phone. I watch them all tap their phone, which blows my mind. They don't know how to use
There
money.
used to be a thing about like a card with a microchip in it. Like years ago, we were protesting against the Bondex, which was like a card that you could load up with money, and then you could go around town and use it, and all the parking things. So it was like an experiment about having this chip for money.
Okay.
That happened in Guelph.
Yeah.
I think it was like an experimental thing with that city. We're like, this is terrible. That's not every card you have has that chip in it.
Yeah. I didn't know that about schools. I'm gonna look that up.
Check it.
I will.
Verify. I may be wrong, but I'm quite certain it's actually Ontario law.
Interesting.
Yeah, it seems that,
It's enforced.
I would think that there could be a technological sort of a way where reception can be managed through technological companies, right? Like, they can have a zone, if they can know that that's where you are, then you can basically say, excuse me, we don't want reception here.
On the school.
And we are a school, we don't want reception here, and if you provide it here outside of whatever, that we can hold you accountable for that. It
Interesting.
seems that could be, it's about holding them accountable in a way where they see the cost,
Yeah.
right? There is a potential cost liability there, and that we as citizens or as people that of self-governing, we should be able to put those parameters and not be subjected to the profit interests of big corporations in these ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that before. The problem is that the schools use the internet for so much else.
You can
Yeah,
They're
but you can
uploading
have
the
those parameters,
grades, and they're
right?
showing kids YouTube videos for this and that, like it's just,
Right.
yeah. it's
My place of
hardcore.
work is getting rid of their phones. It's all gonna be on the computer. It's nuts.
No landline?
No,
They used to
landlines.
wheel in the TV on their
And
cards, you know,
yeah.
it was like, it's time for Bill and the Science Guy.
Friday afternoon.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah, Friday.
Good old VHS.
Well, I guess it's also the fight, like to not have Wi-Fi in the schools,
Mhm.
although phones can have other access, but,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, and that's,
that kind
that's the problem, because the teachers are often trying to meet the kids kind of where they're at. You know, let's, everyone pull out your phones for this project so that you can feel like you're more engaged, but any increase in engagement immediately is lost with distraction, so
Wow.
too much,
So many
Downward
notifications
spiral.
like jumping down from the top.
too much overlap.
Become Amish.
Yeah. Anyways.
And just the last bit, it would be, we never did figure out, because we are Luddite, we never figured out how to shut off access in the house. Or if somebody still needs to do some work at midnight, how do you shut off the kids' access? Or whatever, and every company's like, oh yeah, family safety, couldn't figure out anything that they were saying that actually helped you with that.
Oh, it's like a full-time job, just trying to stay ahead of parental controls and how they're constantly evolving,
Yeah.
and all the different apps and the new programs that are always coming out. And some parents choose to do that. That just seems exhausting to me. I wouldn't want to do that. I think it's easier just to not let the kids have the devices in the first place, and to not have them in their bedrooms. Keep them in a common area where they can maybe use that computer for homework up until a certain point, and then you're done for the night. Put it away.
All our kids got hand-me-downs from their friends
Oh.
in junior high.
Oh, my old phone, you can
Oh, I
have it.
have my old
That's
phones.
hilarious.
My poor friend.
All right, well, thank you everyone so
Thank
much
you.
for coming.